welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brown, and thanks so much for joining me as we continue to explore the fields of sound therapy, sound healing, and generally using sound for health and wellness. I am thrilled to have Sheila Whittaker as our guest for this episode. I've, of course, followed Sheila through her books and online blog, but was so excited to meet her just a little over 1 year ago at the Gong Summit in July of 2019. And I was so impressed by her masterclass, not only by what she presented, but also her energy, which is quite delicate, yet very powerful or empowered. In this conversation, we explore her background, which comes from a classical violin performance background, a teaching career, a musical lineage, and we follow that formal training and then how it manifested into what she does now, which is this more holistic approach and the journey that brought her to the gong. As we discuss in this conversation about her transformation in her life that led her to sound healing and the gongs, we also discuss this left brain versus right brain approach when it comes to music, and specifically then how that applies to the gong. We talk about what that is about the gong that makes it so effective when it comes to sound therapy, sound healing work. And we also talk about, this blossoming of sound healing and sound therapy and trainings and how that's happening, and both why that might be happening right now, and also some things that perhaps we need to be careful about when we're approaching, whether it's trainings, the way we play the gong, and really that importance of grace, subtleties, silence, pause, and actually the responsibility that we have when we're in this field and working with others. Sheila is highly respected in the gong and sound healing world, and I tell her at the end that she's the most highly requested podcast guest that I've had in the past couple of years. So how wonderful it is to have her join us for this episode, and what an inspiring person she is. This episode is sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. The Om Shop can be found both in Sarasota, Florida, as well as online at theomshop.com, and you can see that they have the largest showroom of crystal singing bowls, sound healing instruments, and vibrational medicine tools in the States. And not only do they have all these wonderful items, the people that work there are truly people of good vibes. They will welcome you, they will help you and assist you as you try to select instruments that might help you in your life and your self-care and help with your clients as well. So please do check out theomshop.com. You can check out their products, their online blog and learning center, as well as these beautiful creative sound journeys that they have been providing. So thank you so much to the Om Shop and Spa for their sponsorship. Please enjoy this episode with Sheila Whittaker. All right, well, let's go ahead and start with your sound progression and really your beginnings, because I think that is important as far as your own training and your formal training, as far as where you got to now, and that you really did have a musical lineage and background and childhood. So if you could tell us a bit about some highlights and your training early on, that would be great.
Yes, well, I was born into a family where one parent, my mother, was extremely musical, and my father was not. But my mother, it was mostly my mother that brought me up. So and she was a fantastic pianist, very, very talented pianist who it was just. It was God-given, really. When she sat down at the piano, God flowed through her. So that's the only way I can describe it, really. She was amazing. So I was brought up with that, and the piano and music was there all the time, right from the beginning. So and she used to sing to me when I was in the womb, she said. So which was nice. One of my earliest memories, I think, from childhood was, and we're going back to the 1950s now. So I remember then there was a program on the radio here which was called Listen with Mother, and it was for mothers and toddlers to listen to together. And they always have a story and a nursery rhyme and, other sort of little bits and pieces. And it was only a quarter of an hour. But every day we used to listen to it. My mother would switch on the radio and we'd listen with Mother, and she would teach me the nursery rhyme, and we'd sing it together, and so I had sort of musical sort of influence there as well. And but one day after Listen with Mother had finished, I went to the piano apparently and picked out the nursery rhyme on the notes on the piano, but also in the right key. And so, and my mother had perfect pitch, and she realised, of course, that it was in the right key. So it sort of brings up the question: is perfect pitch inherited? Because and I did have perfect pitch. That was interesting. I started the piano at age 4 to 5. I went to a kindergarten, which was it was not like normal childhood education. It was much freer. People were able to kind of be creative, and we were taught the reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's, but we also painted, and we did music, and we were outside playing in the garden, and it was just a lovely sort of way to kind of introduce education to a child, really. And so I had that up to the age of 7, and I learned the piano, not with my mother, because there was I was quite strong-willed, and I needed to go to somebody else for piano lessons. And then the violin, and then I went to my next school at around age 8, and from the kindergarten, and the violin came in when I'd been there, I think probably about a year or so. Suddenly, we had a letter from the school saying that violin lessons were going to be introduced, and there was going to be a violin teacher coming. And so my mother, thinking that this would also be a good thing, put my name forward, and so I started violin at school. That was about age 8 or so, 8 or 9. And so I started the violin, and I just took to it very, very, very quickly and easily. And then just sort of came on in leaps and bounds. And after a few months, it became obvious that I needed private lessons. And so that was fixed up. And then after I'd had private lessons with a very wonderful lady called Mrs. Poislib, I remember. She was an elderly lady and very, very motherly, a very good teacher. She recommended that I tried auditioning for the Saturday morning music school at the Royal Academy of Music in London for talented children. And so we had to get in touch with the council, and they put my name forward. And nobody from this particular council had ever done that before, so they weren't sure, whether I was going to get in or not. But I did get in, and so I did much of my early training then at the Royal Academy on Saturday mornings in the music school there, and where I had a good sort of all-round musical education, really, not just violin but also piano, and we had choir and oral lessons and a little orchestra to play in, and and sort of harmony lessons, and so it was just a nice all-round musical education up to the age of 18 at the Saturday morning music school at the Royal Academy. So that was a really good grounding. Then I left school and went to full-time music college, the Royal College of Music in London. I was there for 4 years, did violin first study, piano second study, and graduated with a GRSM, Graduate of Royal Schools of Music degree, and I got my ALRCM teaching diploma as well at the same time. And then I started teaching. teaching violin peripatetically in schools, and also playing freelancing with orchestras and chamber groups. And I had a duo, and did that for about 15 years. And so I had really a mainstream classical music career for, sort of 15, 20 years, really.
Right. So yeah, a real formal training, and for doing it for that long, you must have really enjoyed it. Gosh, I'm just really curious that what sparked your interest after all those years in classical music to a more holistic approach, or how did the gongs come in for you?
Well, there were things happened in my personal life. Um, without going into detail, there was a major change of life, major changes, and so when I came out of that, I actually sort of fell away from music for a while, because there were other things happening, and and then when I sort of came back to music, and I was very glad to get back to music because it's always been a theme in my life, and I've always come back to it, in some way or another, and I just felt, because there was some healing to do from what had happened in my life, and I just felt that there was, there was another path, really. It's kind of beckoning, and that's where sound healing came in. I discovered it, kind of synchronistically, and I was led and guided to the right people and the right courses and things to look at, and so that's how sound healing came in.
So it was really for your own self-care.
Yeah, it was for that, and also the music. It just went down a different route, really, and it just seemed um, the natural way to go. Um, yeah, so it's that was it, really. Yeah.
Yes, I'm just curious a little bit more about that initial sound healing training. Was it all kinds of different instruments? Did you change the way you played the violin, or was there a different kind of progression that ended up leading you to the gongs, which is, really your specialty at this
Yeah.
point? What did that kind of look like, that initial start into sound healing?
Well, um, we're talking about kind of 23 years ago now. Um, Yeah, first of all, for the healing journey for me, I discovered Reiki actually, and I was kind of led to it. I went to a mind body spirit fair at Kempton Park Racecourse, and with the intention of listening to a talk given by a sound healing person. And that was my main reason for going. But when I got there, I came across a Reiki stall, and sort of I was kind of drawn, to using Reiki, the fact that energy flows through us, and we can use it for healing, in a sort of tactile way. And one of the Reiki stands at the fair, kind of drew me really, and so I sat. And they were giving little taster sessions, and so I went and sat down, and the Reiki master who was running it came over and said, "Have you ever had Reiki before?" And I said no, and so he said, "Okay, just sit, and I'll give you some Reiki." So he did, and as soon as he put his hands on my shoulders, I felt the energy come through. And I went very hot, and it was just so direct and so powerful. It just it blew me away really. And so at the end of a few minutes, it was a very beautiful feeling. He said to me afterwards, "Are you doing any healing work?" And I said, "No, not yet." And he said, "Well, you should be, because your crown chakra is actually open." So. So I said, "Oh, right. Do you run courses? Because I'm interested in learning." So and he was running a course in Brighton. I was living in Brighton at that time, and he was running a course in Brighton in 2 weeks' time, unbelievably. And these are the sort of synchronicities and coincidences that happen, when you're on following a path, aren't they? And so yes, I went to that and never looked back really. I did the training, and I got intuitive guidance and information through right from the beginning. I remember doing the training and putting my hands on somebody's. The person that I was working with in that first degree session, and I put my hands on her and on her heart chakra, and I could feel all the pain there. I could just feel it. It came through me, and I actually cried because I cried with her pain, and it was just so powerful. So it all started really from there. So. And then, just to go back to the fair, then that's what happened with Reiki. But just to go back to the fair, I went to the lecture that the sound healing lady was giving, and I'd gone with the intention of seeing if she was a teacher that I would want to learn with. And I realised, having been to the lecture, that she wasn't the right teacher. But at the fair, I found a magazine, again, which was kind of put into my hands, and there was an article by Simon Heather, who runs the College of Sound Healing, the sort of president of the College of Sound Healing, and it just, so I inquired, and he was teaching courses, and I just knew instinctively, as I always seem to know instinctively, that this was the right teacher, and so I went to the course, and that was the beginning of my sound healing journey. I did the course with him, and became a sound healer, and we're talking about like 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right, and now you teach for them. Yeah, the synchronicities really are really profound. I mean, I think that just happens when you allow it and find your path. I think it's really amazing. Gives me goosebumps. But one question I have about that early start to sound healing is, gosh, you came from this formal training, which is very left-brained. It's, classical music is quite left-brained and technical. And in fact, I've seen some people approach sound healing from a very technical, left-brained way, and they can't really turn it over to intuition that easily. But it seems like it just came so easy for you. What do you think led to your more right-brained, intuitive, kind of surrendered way of approach? Do you think you were just open to that healing, that self-care so much at that time?
I think that we all have this intuitive guidance within us, and some of us are more open than others, and maybe I was just more open at that time, because it just flowed really straight away right from the beginning. So I went to so I started giving Reiki to people, sort of on an informal basis at home, and doing that, and also, and then I did the sound healing course and started introducing the sound healing as well. And I was doing that at home on an informal basis, and I did that for several years really. And it was a healing journey for me, and also it started healing journeys for other people as well. And I was treating friends and family and acquaintances and people I knew, and it was starting to become sort of more professional. I was kind of going down a more professional route as well with it, and starting to charge, and feeling that this is what I wanted to do as my work, and taking the music down this route. This is where the music was going along the sound healing route, and more directly affecting people. Because when you play classically, as you say, it's kind of a more left brain approach, and it's you play music that's on the page, on the sheet, and there's not very much room for sort of spontaneity in the classical music field. But when you're if you're working with music in a different way, in the right brain way, in the more sound healing way, then there's lots of spontaneity. And in order to allow that, I just had to put the left brain musical training aside, really, and step out of it and approach the sound healing in a different way. And I was able to do that. And the challenge really was when the gongs came along 2 or 3 years later, shall I tell you the story of how that happened?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, so so I went to a Mind Body Spirit Fair, another Mind Body Spirit Fair up in London, Victoria, a big one, and I was invited there by my Reiki master because he had a Reiki stand there, and I said yes, I'll go and help on the Reiki stand one day. So. So he brought he came to lunch with me and was talking about it, and he brought a program for the fair, and so I looked through the program after he'd gone, and I said I'll let you know what day I'm coming, and so I was flicking through the program and I saw a photograph of Don Conroe, and he was giving a talk, and the talk was about gongs, and it just his photo and the whole sort of narrative sort of around it just kind of shot out of the page at me. It was just like really notable, and I thought, oh, I've got to hear this. It just felt important. So I arranged to go on the day that he was doing this talk, and so I turned up at the fair. And I walked in the door of it was a great big venue because it's an enormous fair. And I came in the door and went through the turnstile, and I heard this sound. And as soon as I got in there, and it was a sound I'd never heard before, never. And I just followed the sound, and the sound led me to booth 1 in the corner of the auditorium, where Don Conroe was giving somebody a little taste of gong bath in the booth, and I was absolutely mesmerised. It was like magnetic. And I just stood there, really. I must have looked silly because I think my mouth was open, probably. And I just stood there and watched and listened, and I'd never heard anything like it. And so it was really profound. And so anyway, when he finished, there was somebody, he was giving the gong bath and somebody was sitting behind. It was a little sort of seated taster session. Anyway, when he'd finished, he stood up and turned around, and I was just absolutely amazed. And so I booked a gong bath. I booked myself in for a gong bath, and then I went off to the Reiki stall, and I came back at the right time for the gong bath, and I had a 10-minute taste of gong bath, it just absolutely blissed me out. It was only 10 minutes, but it was life changing, totally life changing. And somehow I managed to get out from behind the gong and sort of find my way back to the Reiki stand. And I tell you, when everyone on the Reiki stand saw the state that I was in, they all went and booked a gong bath.
Yeah.
So it was absolutely life changing. So, and that was in the morning. So in the afternoon, I popped upstairs to the lecture room for this talk by Don about the gongs, and there was a gong bath afterwards given by Don and one or two of his students, and that just blissed me out for about 2 or 3 days really, and so it was, and so by that time I'd sort of got to the space of I need to learn this. I need to find out about this and get a gong and work with it. So I went up to Don at the end of the talk and said to him, and I'm quite direct when I know, what I need, and what's right for me. And I said, no, I want a gong and I want to study with you. And so he said, well, we can get you a gong. And he handed me a pamphlet for the gong master training, which was happening in 2 weeks' time, would you believe?
Wow.
So again, synchronicity. So I booked in for the training, and the rest is history, as they say. That was the story of my encounter with the gongs. It was just really very, very powerful. So.
Well, isn't that interesting, from myself as well, from a classical orchestral background, when you think of the gong in that context, it's the crash, right? It's the impact, and that's pretty much it. But gosh, it's so much more depth, complexity. I mean, it's limitless when you use it in a healing way. So that's my next question. Of all the instruments that could be used for sound healing, gongs is now, that's your specialty, and that's what you teach. Why do you find gongs to be so effective when it comes to healing work?
It's the fullness of sound, really. It's the very broad range of sound in a large gong. And I'm talking particularly about my favourite gongs, which are the symphonic. because for me they have the broadest range of sound, and they're just very, very powerful healing instruments because of that huge sound envelope. And for me, a symphonic gong played well, skillfully, bringing out as many of the layers of harmonics as possible, in a very full kind of way, packing the sound envelope, with as many layers of sound as possible, but without using going over the top with volume. You can, if you play skillfully, you can bring in a lot of layers, without actually going over the top with volume. You can do that at a moderate volume, and that for me is the power of the gong. Really, it's those layers of sound, that fullness of sound, and also it shuts down the left brain, because the gong sound seems to have the ability to affect our brain waves, to lower our brain waves. And so, from the normal sort of beta brainwaves that we normally, have mostly in our everyday life, which help to keep us sort of centered and functioning in our everyday life. And if we lower the brain waves using meditation or a gong meditation, gong sounds, then we can drop into alpha and theta brain waves, and those provide very deep relaxation and often visions and intuitive guidance. And so the gong seems to have a sort of automatic way almost of doing this. It just seems to automatically confuse the left brain with its plethora of sound, and so it moves the focus into the right brain, and that seems to be its power.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's why many people say that gongs shift our consciousness and as well as time and space? It just kind of shuts down that logical.
Yes, I think so. Yes, because we become aware. We become unaware of time and space when we're in a gong meditation. Time seems to cease to exist. Really, we seem, and very often, if I'm giving a gong bath to my students, for instance, and or somebody, a client, they will say, "Gosh, that was quick. That only felt like sort of 5 or 10 minutes, and I've actually been with them for half an hour." So people go into what is almost like a timeless zone, and they just seem to kind of lose themselves. We just go into this timeless space.
Yeah, I think it's also important to mention, for anyone listening that hasn't had specifically a gong bath, it seems to be really good at releasing things as well that need to be healed. It can just bring up whether it's motions or trauma, whether we're aware of it or not. There's something about a release that happens with the gongs as well. Does that seem for you as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So what I've observed and what we've experienced is that people, as we go through life, we collect energies and sort of things impinge on us from everyday life, and especially in the Western world, and so it's not, we don't always take enough time for ourselves to sort of have space and relaxation, and so sometimes our energy becomes a bit dense because of that, because we've still got kind of everyday pressures hanging around us, everyday the pressure or the energy of what we've been dealing with in our everyday lives. Sort of it kind of is still there in our energy field, and so. What the gong sounds seem to do initially is lift any old energy out of our energy field that needs to be cleared away, and that's what I've observed when I used to go and help on the gong stand at Mind Body Spirit Fair, was that people would go into the space behind the gong, and this was only a 10-minute taster gong bath, mind you, and they would be stressed from the journey and from everyday life and all the crowds at the fair and everything, and and they'd sit down behind the gong, and we would gong them for 10 minutes, and they would come out literally looking lighter, literally like a cloud had been lifted off them, and just looking lighter and calmer and more relaxed, and so clearly there'd been an energetic cleaning, a cleansing. And it was very, very clear. This has happened so many times that you can actually see the clearing, the clearing of energy in somebody. And that seems to be the initial thing that happens with the gong sounds. And then to go on with that, then I think when the gong sounds have cleared away that anything old that sort of is hanging around and needs to be cleared, then they get down to what I would call the nitty gritty, really, and start digging into our subconscious and bringing up stuff from that we need to clear, that may be hanging around sort of in our energy field from the past, traumas, or things that need to be healed from the past. And people have had amazing breakthroughs. Just occasionally, we have like a miraculous treatment, which is somebody has cleared a long-standing issue just with one treatment, with the gongs, and it's been life-changing for them. So there's great power in the gong sound. It's quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's really interesting, and I have a feeling that sound healing, sound therapy has been, I would say, a bit stronger and a bit more ongoing in the UK, a bit longer than in the States as far as trainings and what we call gong baths. But in general, there's a real surge as far as interest in sound healing and gongs. Why do you think more and more people are immersing themselves in this now? Why is it important now?
Well, we are going through very challenging times. And I think we've been in, I wouldn't call it a dark age, but I think we've been in an age where, certainly for the last 100 years or so, where ancient medicine and healing modalities have been suppressed in a way, and forgotten. And of course, our ancestors and the ancients were not the savages that we've sometimes been led to believe. They were very wise people who worked in harmony with the earth and with earth energies and with natural modalities, and that's been greatly forgotten over the last sort of 100 years or so, and now, and in this what I would call the new age, in inverted commas, all the alternative holistic healing modalities are starting to come back, and I think this started in the 1960s, with the hippie era, and so gradually people are starting to remember things, and starting to take an interest in sort of. All the ancient technologies that our ancestors had, and sound is very ancient. It's a very ancient modality for healing, and has been in use for thousands of years. But it's just been forgotten. So I think in these times when we're progressing into a new age, we're coming out of the old age and going into a new age. We're ascending. That's why these modalities and all the ancient healing secrets are coming to light now. And so more and more people are realizing this and discovering it and becoming interested in in finding out about it. And I think also that modern medicine has its place, certainly, of course. But I think it can be limited in some ways, in some areas, and whereas there are areas where holistic healing modalities both complement and are better for people in some areas than traditional medicine. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just seems like there's perhaps more acceptance, more awareness of what's really going on in this world, and mainstream is kind of mainstream is people are turning their eye more to the old, which is also the new. And it's just such an interesting time.
Very
And
interesting, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
very
And,
interesting.
and, and is there an upsurge in sound healing interest in the United States now?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, but that's also because, I'm in the field and I'm paying more attention to it, rather than my more academic and classical background. Now I'm in it more, so maybe I'm just seeing more about it. But gosh, it sure just seems like there's more and more
Yeah.
trainings, there's more and more events. Pretty much everyone in my area knows about it. I mean, it's very common, and I don't live in a big place. Um, and what's wonderful about here, at least, is it's not competitive; it's collaborative, right? I mean, as far as I've seen, people are leaving the ego behind when it comes to um, not feeling like there's too many people doing it, or the kind of competition aspect. So maybe that is a question to address, because I'm sure you have dealt with it in your work over all these years, that some people unfortunately do approach the gong and sound healing with their ego. What do you think we need to be careful of in this field, or what advice would you offer for those just getting into sound healing?
Um, yes, we've come across people who have been to, increasingly now, we're coming across people who haven't had any proper training, and haven't really been told how to approach the gong. And it's approaching the instruments in the right way and with the right reverence, really, because these are sacred healing instruments. And so, and they're instruments of great power, and they need to be used in the right way. Because if not used skillfully and in the right way, they can be harmful as well as beneficial. I think that proper training is very important, and people need to be they need to be advised, of how to approach the gongs. And this is one thing that I cover very, very carefully in my training, that you approach the gong in an attitude of surrender. We approach the gong without ego. I always have bare feet or stocking feet, because for me, being in the gong space is like being in a church or a temple. Because it's a sacred healing space, and we need to treat the instruments accordingly. And so ego has no place, really. When I approach the gongs, and I teach my students this too, we approach and just really open ourselves up to the flow of whatever sounds need to come out of the gong for whoever is present, and wherever they are in their journey at this particular time. It's all about approaching it in the right way. And if you develop good playing skills and put the ego aside, and allow yourself to just surrender to the process, the right sounds will come through without the need for excessive volume. And we have, unfortunately, as I said, as I was saying before, come across people who've been to a gong bath where excessive volume was used, and put off
Mm-hmm.
by it, and it's a great shame, because
Yes.
it's a very great shame. Yes, and we're seeing more of that happening now, because in this country there's been an explosion of interest. I can call it an explosion because it's been like like a mushroom, really. And there's in the last 5 years a real explosion of interest, and there are all sorts of trainings cropping up now, which some of which are good and some aren't, and and people also thinking that. That, oh well, I can do this, and maybe I don't need any training, and so and it's just about banging a gong. Well, of course, that nothing could be further from the truth. They're missing completely. So we unfortunately we are. When anything becomes popular, we always see the downside of things, don't we? There's always the downside of human nature as well as the upside. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really mirrored here in the States. I was thinking the past 5 years as well. And, as somebody goes to a 1 or 2 day training, or maybe not even that, and they're just out playing the gong. And yes, I've heard of people having that experience where it's just sound, max volume the whole time. And my opinion is play it for yourself first as a meditation, and just really get used to that gong and its different subtleties, because there's a responsibility when you play gongs for other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a very, very great responsibility. And it's the connection as well for me. That when you buy an instrument and you start playing, you need to connect with it properly. And so because the connection between you and the gong, you form a kind of partnership with the gong. And so and further down the line, the more you work with it, and the more the more you connect and work with your gong for yourself, and and for other people, initially family maybe, and then sort of gradually branching out to treat other people. You form this connection, and it becomes a kind of intuitive sort of partnership, and you become one with the gong, and so and the process kind of continues. You become closer and closer to the gong, to the intelligence behind the gong, and what it can bring through you. So basically, you become a channel eventually. Sort of further down the line, when you have this very strong connection, and so you're channeling whatever sounds need to come through, and that's what we're aiming for, really. And certainly in my training, that's what I teach people to 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 always just be allowing for what's happening, and allow the gong to teach you, really, because the gong will teach you in its own way, with the connection that you have with it.
Yeah, and I really recommend anybody listening to check out Sheila's blog. I'll be sure to drop a link. Just it's really inspiring and empowering, and just I feel like you really do get to know Sheila's personality through it as well. And the reason I mention that is I think it was your last post was called Time Out, and you were actually referring to a vacation that you just
Yeah.
went on. But what's so interesting is immediately after that, we've had a
Yeah.
forced time out, a lockdown. So how interesting. So I'm curious, with this time, I'm assuming all your classes, workshops have been canceled,
Yeah.
postponed. What do you feel? Has it been a time that you've been to refocus energy, or, look into something that you haven't for a long time? Has it been kind of an up and down roller coaster, or a time of empowerment for yourself? I'm just
Yes,
curious.
I would say all those things. Actually, it's been quite a mixture. So yes, the time out. I took a week out, and I went to Madeira, because I've never been there before, and I believe Madeira was part of Atlantis, and it's somewhere I've wanted to go for a long time, because I remember a previous lifetime in Atlantis and some of the circumstances there, and so I visited for a week, and that was in March, or the end of March, the end of February. I came back at the beginning of March, and I just about got back before all this lockdown started. So I'm really glad that I squeezed that trip in before it started. And so when the lockdown came on, yes, I had to postpone my 2 course sessions. The last time I taught before going back a couple of weeks ago was March, and so I hadn't seen my students for 4 months. I had to postpone their session threes in April, because we weren't allowed to convene, and then I had to postpone them again. So the dates were altered. I had to postpone them again in June, but now in July, earlier this month, a couple of weeks ago, I've been able to teach small classes. So what I've done is, because I'm teaching two groups of the Gong practitioner course this year, and so I've split both the groups into 4 groups instead of 2, so that I can have less students, and so it's easier for us to do the work in the class in a socially distanced way, and sort of obeying regulations with the smaller group. So I've taught 2 of the groups so far, and I've got 2 more at the beginning of August, and that will complete our session 3. And I can tell you, the students are so glad to get back into the Gong Space, because I haven't seen them since January. That's over 6 months, and they were really wanting to get back, and the continuity of the course was all broken, and I do feel I've got a responsibility to to provide some continuity in the course, and I'm being prevented from doing that. So, but yes, it was lovely to see them again. So I have got back to some teaching, and I've got a couple more groups coming up in a week or two's time, and then and then we're sort of back on track really. So it's a great relief to do that.
Oh gosh, I can only imagine how rewarding that feels, and it's just so needed right now. I mean, I can only imagine things are slowly starting to happen in particular states here as well. So, yeah, gosh, I guess my kind of last area of question is, after being in music and specifically the gongs for so many years, what part of your work is most important to you right now, or what new curiosity do you have in this work?
So the most important part of my work is the training other people, training my students to become not just gong practitioners, but actually more well-rounded, centered people, because that's something that happens naturally during the training. And because as we work on ourselves with the gongs, and I teach them to work on other people, our own healing happens at that time, obviously. And so, they're clearing their stuff, as well as learning to treat others. And so, and it's just raising, they're raising their vibration, and becoming clearer and lighter. And so, and it's wonderful for me to see, it's particularly wonderful for me to see that transformation during the course. How they are when they come, at session 1 of the course, and then to see them go off into the world at session 5. Some of them completely different people, and some of them have had significant life changes because of their work with the gongs. Some of them have left jobs that they didn't like and started doing something really empowering that they love. Some of them have changed, homes and relationships, and all sorts of things have happened to people during the course, due to the work with the gongs. And it's just wonderful to see the transformations in people. Not always easy, because clearing stuff and healing isn't always easy, because sometimes it's very uncomfortable. But the difference in them from, in my students from the beginning of the course to the end is quite remarkable. And that really is what's most important to me. That's what I find, very, very empowering, really. And because this work with the gongs is, for me, it's all about empowerment, and seeing people growing and maturing, and and learning through the work. So that's the most important thing for me. It's the training of other people.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, awakening, transforming is not always pretty, right? You kind of have to go through, you have to go through the hard stuff to get to that. And if we kind of look back at what you've explained through this, is that's what happened for you to find this passion and this empowerment in your life, is getting through those difficult times, and then discovering through all these synchronicities. I mean, I think that's a common theme that I hear as far as people's transformation, and it's really beautiful. It can be scary, but it really is beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why it's important to when you're working with gongs, to do some training with somebody who is, of a high energy vibration, somebody who's experienced, someone who's, who approaches the gongs in the right way, because then they can be there to sort of help you and mentor you. I'm very careful with my mentoring of students, and I'm always there for them, because sometimes people write and they're in a quandary, and they've had some something's happened, some healing thing has happened, and they need to talk about it. And and it's important, I think, in a training for the teacher to be there for the students. And so because you can't just introduce people to this work and then kind of leave them floundering. That's not fair.
That's a really good point. Yes. Yeah, that's actually crucial, is understanding that the healing response can be anything. And also that, if you're new to this, really look into trainings and really kind of research a bit, or get references if you can, look at testimonials, and do, continued learning, I think, is so important as well. I mean, even you yourself or myself, I do. You're always learning,
Yes,
and you're
absolutely.
always immersing yourself in this. Don't feel like you just can do a one-day training. Just, be curious.
I would say that
Yeah.
I start people off and I give them techniques for playing, and I mentor them and teach them. We go in stages through the course, with the work. But in the end, they leave and they've graduated and so forth, and then the gong becomes the teacher. Their connection with the gong,
Right.
and their ongoing training really is with the gongs and the intelligence behind the gongs, and so we always continue learning, always, even even those of us who have been at it for years. There's always more to learn, and more healing to do. So
Right. Just
yeah.
allow and lean into the gong, and what is it telling you? Yeah. Wonderful. Gosh, is there any area that we've missed or anything that else you'd like to kind of leave us with?
Just want to mention, you mentioned my blog earlier, and actually it's interesting that we should have this interview at this time, because I'm actually having a new website at the moment, and so
Oh,
and
okay.
the blog will be sort of merged into the new website, and so yes, I suddenly got put in the situation of needing to have a new website, because my provider it was decided to suddenly terminate my contract.
Oh, okay.
So yes, the new website has been ongoing for the last few weeks, and so it should be up on the net within the next week, I hope. So
Oh, great.
it's
Okay.
actually my name. It's www.sheilawhitaker.com, and
Oh, fantastic.
so
Okay.
yes, everything will be on there. So I'm looking. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to having a new website. It's about 7 or 8 years since I had one, so it's great.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I think you're a beautiful person, and like I mentioned, you are the most asked for podcast guest that I've had in the past couple of years. So I'm just glad this has worked out and that you've been willing to share so much with us through this.
Thank you. I'm glad to we've connected and been able to do it. I have to say I'm not a great talker.
Oh,
So
sure you
I'm
are.
not
Sure you
well.
are.
I'm not naturally a great talker, and I
Mm,
let the gongs do the speaking normally. So
sure.
to do an interview is quite tough for me, really, because I'm not
Uh,
really sort of. But anyway, I'm going. I'm sort of getting used to it. But yeah. And anyway, I'm glad to have. I'm glad you asked me. It's good. So
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I do remember from the Gong Summit, what's so interesting about your energy and your presentation you gave is your gentle but powerful energy. I can tell you are soft, but yeah, there's so much there, and there's so much that you share with people. I'm just glad that we can get this out there. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate your time, and have a beautiful evening.
thank you, Natalie, and you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sound Heal Podcast, sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. You can keep up to date with what's coming up next at soundshealstudio.com. Check things out on Facebook at Sounds Heal Studio, and you can listen to all previous podcasts as well as music meditations on the YouTube channel at Sounds Heal Studio. Be well and stay tuned.